I guess we can start now. We'll just jump right in. So this is it. This is not a super in-depth sealed guide for Kaldheim, but it's a lot about just getting the conversation started and getting some ideas out there, especially for people that just like don't play a lot of sealed, because sealed is kind of an underplayed format, right? Especially if you started in the past 2 years. Hell, if you started this year, I'm sure you haven't played any sealed, because sealed is just not a thing anymore. If you haven't played pre-release, where else will you have played sealed, right? So this is really just to get the ball rolling, get people more acquainted with it. And yeah, I'm excited, of course, for the arena event. That's the reason why I'm putting this together, because I want people to do well in that. I hope, not too well. I want to win the whole thing. But I do think that there's not a ton of great sealed content out there. And that's just been a issue because, people don't play a lot of sealed, so there's not much use for it. So I'm glad that this is an excuse to have some sealed content. Let's jump in. So first off, I just want to get into some big picture sealed ideas. And yeah, we'll go from there. And the number one thing that I think is really important to talk about and think about as you're building your sealed pool is my goal for sealed is to build the best deck in my pool. The best deck my pool can make. And maybe that sounds obvious, right? Obviously you want to do that. But I think that a lot of things you hear about sealed, like, play all your bombs, and sealed is very slow, and stuff like that, can kind of detract from the final goal of just building the best deck. And we'll come back to this, exactly what that means. But don't let things drag you away from just attaining this goal. No matter, the other things you've heard about sealed, basically. So let's go look at some attributes for a successful sealed deck first, right? Number one, removal and interaction spells. I consistently, if you know me and know my content, I soapbox against taking removal spells too highly. But the thing is, in sealed, you're just going to face more powerful cards in general. Maybe not on average. Well, I'd even say on average, more powerful cards. Because instead of picking from 3 packs, the average person has 6 bombs to choose from. You know what I mean? Instead of, in a draft, you open basically 3 rares, right? You might get past some, you might not get a good one, right? But on average, around 3 good rares. And in sealed, you have access to 6. Obviously, not all your rares are going to be playable, but you're gonna run into those pools where the person has 6 playable rares and a bunch of good uncommons, right? So removal is kind of just a necessity. Unless you are a low to the ground aggressive deck, which does happen, and we'll get into that, you just need removal because the games are going to go longer, and you're just going to need to kill the things, right? The things that are killable. If they have coma, you just lose. But, if they have the angels or whatever, you're going to need to kill them. So a good sealed deck needs interaction, needs removal spells, and it's going to be one of the reasons you go into the colors you go into when you're choosing your colors, right? I want to point out these 2 cards, Bound in Gold and Feed the Serpent, because I think Bound in Gold gets a little bit worse in sealed, and Feed the Serpent gets a little bit better in sealed than compared to draft, right? And that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about here, is the differences between draft and sealed in the format, and in draft and sealed, Kaldheim specific and Kaldheim agnostic, right? And so Bound in Gold gets a little bit worse, just because, the longer the games go, and sealed tends to go a little bit longer, not too much longer, but a little bit longer, the more time this has to get bounced or blown up by a masked vandal or something like that, right? It's still going to be a good card. You're still going to play it, but like, say you are you're like, oh, I should play my white because I have 3 Bound in Golds, right? Well, that might not be as big of a pull as it would be if you had 3 Feed the Serpents. And while Feed the Serpent is awkward in draft, it's going to be a lot better in sealed because you just need to answer those important cards, right? It's the clunkiness is not as punishing as it might be in sealed, as it were in draft. And another point I want to talk about with removal is be very careful and be picky, be choosy about the things you target, right? Like in draft, you kind of just have to kill their 2 drops a lot of the time, right? You just snap off the removal spell when you have it to spend mana because you can't afford to not spend the mana when you have it. In sealed, because it's a little bit slower, kill the things that matter. Don't kill the things that don't matter, right? Like, don't spend it on their like Horizon Seeker or whatever. You're gonna need to kill their like Glorious Protector or their like Mythic Angel or whatever it is, right? So just be very choosy about that. But I want to preface that with, if you have to kill the thing that's killing you, if it is a Horizon Seeker and you're stuck on 2 mana, just Bounty Goldie, you know? So there's a bit of push and pull there. A lot of this is going to be, you know, kind of like I was getting at before. Don't take things you should do in Sealed as rules, hard and fast rules. These are guidelines, right? Still, play to your intuition, I would say is a good way to put it. Oh wait, let's move on. Card advantage. This is another very important thing in Sealed. Again, because the games are going a little bit longer, I want to stress a little bit longer, and I keep saying this, right? It's not super long. Some games do go super long, but on average, I think your games are going to go half a turn longer, maybe 2. In Draft, you can kind of get away without playing, you know, a bunch of card draw, right? But in Sealed, card draw is a big draw. No pun intended. I don't have my soundboard for it, but like, you know, in Sealed, Behold the Multiverse and Skullrite are draws into the colors when you're picking, right? Stuff like the Cauldron, stuff like Cosmos Elixir. Cosmos Elixir is just like one of the best cards you can open, right? One of the ways, you know, you can win a game of Magic, a game of Sealed, through just a normal game of Magic, out-tempoing your opponents, getting fair attacks, like just playing normal mid-range Magic. But when you can rely on something like Cauldron or just drawing a bunch of cards, it gets a little bit easier because you don't have to get those, as Final Love would say, accruing marginal advantages here and there on combats, right? So having a card like this and being able to build around the Rhyme Staff, that really helps. Something like Firewalker even. This is really, really important, right? Like, when I'm building my creature base, something like Firewalker is so good compared to your average. Like, this card compared to the 3, what's the other creature in red? The 3 mana 3/2, the Berserker. This compared to the other 3 mana card is so much better. Right, just being able to trade for a creature and draw cards, and sometimes you get it for multiple hits, and it's very, very good. So our 2 things so far are removal, card advantage, very, very important. And this is one, quality creatures and ways to win the game. This is the one that gets overlooked because you always hear about removal and card advantage. Those are the ones that you're like, yes, of course you need removal and card advantage in Sealed. But this is the one that gets overlooked so much, right? Quality creatures and ways to win. Because you can have a pile of removal spells, you can have a bunch of card draw, but if you can't close a game, you're not going to be able to win. So prioritizing something like Mistwalker as something that can close the game. Avalanche Troller is obviously a great one. Your rares are going to be good ones, obviously. But even something like Ice-Hide Troll. This is something that I found in this Sealed format is a real win condition. Now, there's ways to deal with it, of course, but it is a meaningful threat, even more so in Draft, I would say. And even something like Grizzled Outrider. And this is maybe where the shift in thinking comes in. Where something like Grizzled Outrider, if I'm short on ways to close out the game, I'm really looking for this card. Because if I have a pile of removal spells, a pile of card advantage, this 5/5 is going to get the job done. And not only that, but putting a 5/5 down, or like a Craven Hulk on turn 4, will help you cast your cards and be able to let you leverage your removal spells better. Right? So, Ravenous Lindworm, very, very good card in Sealed, I would say. Obviously, if you have the busted bombs, that's great too. But stuff like this is very, very important, right? Yes, that's a great point. Chat points out, Marcus points out, sometimes this Grizzled Outrider is just like a 2-for-1, or the Ice-Side Troll is just a 2-for-1, because it just bricks so much. So it is card advantage in a way, right? Virtual card advantage. Moving on here. So I threw together a bunch of like kind of not real decks, but just to illustrate a point, right? So this is an example of a Sealed deck that has a bunch of removal spells, has some card advantage with Skull Raid and Glimpse the Cosmos. This is not what I would consider a good Sealed deck, though, right? Look at all the removal spells you have. You've got 2 Icebind Pillars. I didn't throw in many Snowlands, so these Icebind Pillars are probably not going to be good. But if you can imagine, I have Snowlands here, right? And I have 2 Poison the Cups, and I have Glimpse the Cosmos. Maybe I even have a Behold the Multiverse. And my ways to win are 2 Dread Riders. That's just not going to work out, right? Because your opponent's just going to play a quality curve of creatures. You're going to have to spend your removal spells on their 2 drops and their 3 drops, and it's just not going to get the job done. Maybe some games. But if I compare my good removal spells in black with another color. Because look, this blue offers me Icebind Pillar, Run Ashores, interaction spells. If I have good removal in one color, I'm probably going to want to pair it with another color that offers me ways to win the game, right? So this deck I put together here, this is probably, it looks like a worse deck, right? It looks like it has worse cards in it. But the 3 Ravenous Lindworms add so much to the deck. So much to complement the Poison, the Feed the Cup. The Feed the Serpent, right? Now, the pack mates are obviously great too, and that would be a pull into green. You should always play all your pack mates if you're in green. But yeah, exactly, great. But you know what? These are also such great complements to this. You think it looks better in CAA? Well, then you have good intuition in CAA. You have good intuition. That's funny. I would like, my point I'm making is these are big draws for a lot of people. They see, ooh, good cards, right? But they don't maybe see, ooh, Ravenous Lindworm and Outrider. Those are good cards too. I shouldn't even include Packmate. Take the Packmates out of this deck. I think this is better, right? All right. And here's another important point. Sealed is slower than Draft, but only by a little. Okay. Don't have a bad curve. Good cards don't mean anything if you're dead. And so this is something that I think gets overblown quite a bit in a lot of sealed content, or not even in sealed content, because it's true. But I think the way it's applied gets overblown, you know? So, look, I was just talking about how good Ravenous Lindworm is, right? We got Cyclone Summer. This is great. We got Outrun. That's a great card, right? But this curve is just going to get run over by anything, right? In the slowest of matchups, maybe it won't, and maybe it'll be okay. Yeah, Outrun's a 2-drop at least. That's true. And Foretell helps this a lot. But you got to make sure that you can do stuff in the early game if you want to get to your late game. Very simple concept, but I think it's very much overlooked, right? Yeah. What about Dread Rider? Doesn't help in the game? Not good enough, Zach. Again, not good enough is the way I would put it. It doesn't stabilize you either, right? That's a distinction to make. Lindworm, I think, is a lot better at finishing because it stabilizes you and it finishes faster, right? One thing you can consider in Kaldheim Draft, right, is that if you have a lot of Foretell, it gets a little bit better. Not a lot better, but definitely a little bit better. You may need to pair your powerful cards with a color that provides you early game, right? So I have these, you know, the Asika's Chariot, these Lindworms, which I said are a pretty big pull. But I think this is a better build, and again, these are not real builds, but I think adding these like 2s, which in Actor Cavalry is a good 2, even though it's like not the most impactful card, with like cheap removal here. If we're talking big picture Kaldheim Sealed, we'll get into later. I think what you want to be doing is have a greedy pile, either a very greedy pile or a very streamlined aggressive pile of cards. The thing is, even with the really greedy piles, you still want to be able to do stuff in the early game. That's very important. It's very, very important. We'll get more into that later. So, where you come down to here is like, prepare to face the aggressive decks, because there will be aggressive decks, right? But have a plan for the late game. You got to have both, right? Not everybody you face is going to be greed piles. Not everybody you face is going to be mid-range piles. And this is where sideboarding and best of 1 and best of 3 kind of mishmash, and it's going to be depend on what format you're playing, right? Because in best of 3, you're going to be able to sideboard, and you're going to be able to drastically change your plan post board. If you are facing a very dirty deck, maybe this is just the best build, you know? And if you are facing a very aggressive deck, this is certainly going to be the better build, right? This deck, and this is my busted sealed pull from yesterday. Yes, maybe a bit of a humble brag, but this is a good example of a sealed deck that just kind of has it all. It has the good interaction, has the good early game, the good late game, and one of the problems that you run into is you don't want to be playing bad early game, right? You don't want to be playing, and we'll get into this in a second. The problem is you want to be playing the early game like you would in draft, but you don't want cards that are dead on turn 5 because games do go a little bit longer, right? So the solution for that, is that, yeah, here we go. Sorry, I mixed up my slides. The solution to that is play cheap cards, just not the bad cheap cards. So these are examples of cheap cards that are good. And I'm putting this Soros Pac-Man as a 2-drop because it basically is, right? It's the most 2-droppy of the Foretell cards. But all of these cards are good against the aggro decks that you're gonna face. You will. And they're good against the control decks, right? Even something like Axar Cavalry is something that is not fantastic in the late game, but still has some value, right? And then all these cards are still good in the late game, but can block when your opponent goes, aggressive 2-drop on 2. You can just drop your Mass Vandal. That's going to be sweet. It's going to be awesome. These are the not so good cheap cards. So the distinction I would make is don't play bad cheap cards just to fill your curve. Like, yes, if your late game is extremely good, you might have to, right? You might just have to. As like, okay, I just don't want to die. But in your average deck, you don't want to be playing these cards. I include Bloodsky Berserker because the win rate of this card drops a lot past turn 2, right? If you don't drop this on turn 2, it's a lot worse, right? What about the double spell? Don't even consider the double spell deck as a deck. I'm talking about in draft as well, but especially sealed because that'll come together much less, right? Berserker is just not a card that I find to be fantastic. It's fine, but especially in sealed, it's going to be worse because it's a 2-drop that does not have value in the late game. When you draw this on turn 6, it's going to be a lot worse unless you have a ton of card draw, right? What was I going to say? Yeah, so big picture, you got to have those cheap cards and make them impactful. And so one thing that's interesting to talk about is, should you play an aggro deck in sealed, and should you be prepared to face aggro? So we talked on this a little bit, right? And the conventional wisdom says that aggro is not good in sealed, and the subtext to that is aggro is not usually good in sealed, right? Don't be afraid to play a good aggro deck if you open it, right? I think this looks like a draft deck, but this was a real sealed deck from somebody. This is a realistic sealed deck that you can open. And maybe you have a more powerful blue-green deck in there with good bombs. But if not, this is going to be a good, a good second option. It's not the absolute most ideal, but this is still a good aggressive deck. And it kind of looks like a draft deck almost, right? And the point of this is that you should be prepared to face both ends of the spectrum. Because in this sealed format specifically, there are decks that are at both ends of the spectrum, and you're gonna face decks like this. So don't be surprised when you do. In what's it called? In Zendikar Rising sealed, one of the better decks and decks that came back together, or that came together often, was Red White Warriors. That was actually like a pretty common deck that you would see in the sealed leagues on MTGO. And again, that kind of goes against conventional wisdom, but as the quality of common creatures has gone up over the years, the more likely you are to see a good aggressive deck in a given sealed pool, right? So again, you're just going to face them and look for them in your own pool when it is the best deck. I'm going back again to this original slide. My goal in sealed is to build the best deck in my pool, right? You don't want to say, hey, this is a bad deck just because it's an aggressive deck. It might just be the best card deck in your pool, right? So don't worry about that. Rummager is okay late game because you get a card for a land. So I would say not as much Kaldheim. I don't think that this is a card I'm looking to play. Sorry, we're skipping around a bit. This is still not great, right? Yes, you get your card back, but the body is not a card in sealed. It's not as much of a card. Maybe if you're a very aggressive deck and you just want 2-1 and you have a bunch of equipment to augment it, that's fine. But this is not a cheap card I'm looking to play because the card is not a real card. This is not a real card, right? All right, so I spoiled it, but here are my sealed color rankings, and because this is something that gets asked a lot. What's the best color in sealed? It doesn't really matter because unlike draft, where you should be biasing in draft to go with your preferences and what is better in the format and not, the answer is what you open, right? Black is bad in Kaldheim, right? It's not very good. But if you open a busted black pool with good black cards, do not shy away from playing it, right? Do not shy away from playing your good black cards. Don't be like, ooh, but black is kind of bad in this format. I don't want to play this deck. No, it all depends on what you open, right? It's really what it depends on. Moving on here, I'm bringing it up again. I guess I didn't have to circle all the way back. My goal in CL is to build the best deck my pool can make, right? Should I be splashing? So this is a very, very big question as well. I think my camera is a little bit off. Because, again, this is going back to the sealed conventional knowledge, like splash your good cards. I'm going to go back to this slide. My goal in Sealed is to build the best deck I can possibly make. And sometimes that means splashing, and sometimes that means not splashing, right? If you have a good 2-color deck, and, you know, you have some good cards in a different color, you don't need to be splashing. Now, in this format, I think you should be looking at your 5-color greed pile this is one of the first decks I should go to. But if you just have a good streamlined deck, it could be black-green, it could be white, or it doesn't matter what it is. Don't be looking for power in the wrong places, especially if you don't have the fixing, right? So the times I'm looking to splash, and here's an example, right? Bad mana is a silent killer, and this is something that comes up a lot. I see sealed decks that look like this all the time, right? Yes, maybe this is a powerful deck when you hit your mana, but this mana base is terrible, right? You open Halvar, Doomscar, Alrun, Burning Room Demon, great. But this is not a deck that's set up to be able to cast these cards, right? Not in a reasonable time frame, basically. Yeah, 6/6/6 mana base. Very, very bad. Do not do this. Sealed is about playing your powerful cards, but not about playing it is about playing your powerful cards. It's not about not being able to cast your powerful cards, right? So, splash within reason. Play your best cards within reason. This is an example of a real sealed deck where this person is, black-green based, but they have a lot of fixing, right? They have the means to splash, and I think this is a common example of the decks you're going to be a good version of the decks you're going to be finding in your sealed pool, where you're like base green, splashing a lot of your cards. Just to go back to here for a second, should I be splashing? It's a pretty complex question to answer, because it's like, you have to ask yourself, do I need the power, right? Do I need to be splashing to make this deck requisite power? And the question I have here is my deck missing removal, card advantage, or ways to win? Those 3 things I talked about before that are important for any good sealed deck in the format, right? If you are missing one of those things, like removal, and you have the fixing, you should splash for it, right? If you're missing a key part to your deck, yes. But if you already have removal, and this is one of the most common mistakes, I think, is people splashing for removal when they already have removal in their base colors, right? It's just not a risk you need to take when you already have that in your base colors. The question I'm asking, of course, is do I have ways to splash responsibly? And the best ways are your lands, and luckily, Kaldheim is really good fixing. You're going to get some number of Shimmer Drift Veils, hopefully, these volatile affords, right? These snow lands, these snow duels. And these are the best ways to splash, right? If you open up when I open up my pool, I'm often looking to my lands first to see what I can reasonably splash with my lands, right? Grant says, do you side to a splash if you feel like you need it against a stronger deck? Yeah, for sure. And that's something that you can talk about. We can talk about in sideboarding too, right? Now, what I would say is these ones I would caution a little bit, because if I have a very powerful deck with a lot of really powerful cards, and I need to play cards that just fix my mana, like Just Spirit Sentinel, like Glittering Frost, I will play them, but only if I don't have better options, right? And I want to preface this, of course, with if you have reasons to play Sentinel, like you have elf synergies or you have ways to use the body in the late game, you can do that. But Glittering Frost is, I think, a lot worse than Shimberdrift Veil or these, any of the lands. Because it's just a land that you have to pay 3 mana for, right? If you care about snow, that's a different story, and you can definitely care about snow. But if you're just using this to fix your mana, it's a second tier splash enabler, right? But Mr. Metronome says Sentinel is basically a Mox Emerald. In draft, you can make a Mox Emerald more often, Sand, right? So, when I look at my sealed pool, I would go, oh, I'm very excited to see these cards. And I'm not as excited to see these cards. I think Frost Ramping is what let us skip on bad early game. Yeah, so that's a great point to address. I would think so. In chat we have I think Frost Ramping is what lets us skip on bad early game and rush through the boom booms and card draw. Against the other grindy decks, that's a fine way to think about it, right? But this is a huge cost against the decks that are even just putting a decent 2-mana 2/2 on board, is the way I would say it. Because a lot of times, what happens is like, they play a 2/2, you play this, they play a 3/3, you play a boom boom, they have a removal spell, they get you, right? It's not enough. It's just not enough most of the time, right? The lands are much, much better and a much easier way to to splash, and this is a cost. I see this card as a cost. Unless you really have a use for snow. That's the key, right? Okay, and here's another sealed thing to talk about, right? Should you plan for board stalls? Because often you hear, oh, sealed stalls out a lot, right? Now, sealed going long doesn't necessarily mean it's the board is stalling, right? And when I say board stalls, I mean like think of these big boards, right? You could have a kind of a game state where the attacks aren't super profitable for other person, but you have, maybe just 3 creatures on each side, right? That's like a mini board stall that, one good creature from either side can really change that, right? I'll attack with my 2 3/3s into your 3/3s if I've drawn a 5/5, right? I wouldn't call that as a board stall. And I think the idea of like traditional sealed board stalls just don't happen very much in this format and in formats of late, really, because the cards are just more powerful. Your common creatures will be able to push through a lot of the time, right? So should I plan for board stalls to happen? And I see this in building a lot of the time where it's like I'm putting this card in my deck for board stalls. I would say no. So the way I want to look at this is should you main deck Raven's Wings? And the answer to that is if my deck wants it, but it's not a card I just feel like is good in sealed, right? I would say my deck wants it if I don't have good ways to win the game, just naturally. I have a bunch of big things. I have a bunch of the 5/5s, the Lindworms, right? And I don't actually have that many good ways to actually push damage. Maybe my deck can stall at the ground very easily. I can draw some cards that has some removal, but I'm worried about my ability to close out a game. I will put Raven's Wings in my deck, but I'm not interested in putting Raven's Wings in my deck if I'm just like, oh, this is good in sealed. Like, it's good in stalls, right? Because I don't think those game states happen all that often, and this is a real cost, right? Raven's Wings is, again, just like the Glittering Frost, Raven's Wings is a cost, because it's just a card that doesn't do anything, right? It's just a card that, it does something to the game state, but every card matters in sealed. And that's why, when I'm going back to this, these cards are costs as well, because they matter. They don't matter as much, they're not full cards. And each of your cards is going to matter. What about Pilfering Hawk? What's wrong with Pilfering Hawk? In some decks, Pilfering Hawk is good. And so Augury Raven is a weird one because I do like the card, but I think it does go up a little bit in sealed. But I would caution against like an Augury Raven being your thing to win the game. Just like I would caution against Raven's Wing. Like, this is a real card, so I'm not railing against it too hard. But what happens if you're like, okay, I'm gonna win the game with a few flyers, if I just have good ground forces, is your opponents are just gonna use their removal spells on your flyers, and you're not gonna have a great plan to win the game. This I would say, if you need a way to win the game, is better than something like a few flyers, right? So if your pull into blue is, I have a few flyers to close out the game, I would say it's not a huge pull into blue. Because if the rest of your deck doesn't do a lot, they're just going to kill your flyers and you're not going to have much of a plan. But if you have all the other things that make a good sealed deck good, the card draw, the removal, the creatures, this is a supplement for, it's like, here's how I'm going to push, right? Or they can remove your ground blockers and erase you on the ground. That too, Grant. That too, exactly. All right, so sorting your pool, and this is something that I want your opinion on, chat, and we're gonna get into this a little bit later too. I don't have like we're gonna do an actual sealed build, of course, but sorting your pool is tricky. It's a big subject, it's a big topic. So, would you like to talk about the general ideas now, or should we just do it later? Is the question. General ideas first. Okay, so, basically, and this is going to be more talking, less images, but when you sort your seal pool, when you open your seal pool, right, especially on Arena, which is very tricky. First of all, I want to preface this with the Arena deck builder is very bad for sealed, because you just can't seal your cards. So what I would do, and what I did do, is download 17lands.com, or install it on your computer, and you can actually see your pool better there. It actually just like shows it like it would on Magic Online, right? And so that gives you a better idea of your color in general, right? one of the things you can do when you're looking on 17 lands and seeing, your pool as like your color, what does your green look like, is you just get a better idea of like, okay, this is a playable color or it's not a playable color, right? So that's just, big picture idea of making it a bit easier to parse your pool. When I go through my sealed pool, it's good to look at your rares, right? It's good to take note of them. But I do think that what happens, often you'll hear the advice of like, look at your rares, have those guide you, right? And this comes back to, again, oh, the goal of my sealed deck is to build the best deck my pool can make, right? And so I think a lot of times what happens is you look at your rares, you go, oh, these are very good rares. Like you open up, a Cyclone Summoner, a Battle of Frost and Flame, and, some good top-end blue and red cards. And you kind of go, oh, like I should just be building this deck and build around it. Like put my rares in the yes pile and then take good and blue and red cards, right? But I think that, it's definitely good to look at those rares, but don't let that guide your decisions too heavily. Use it as a tiebreaker, maybe, right? But really, you have to look at the deck as a whole, right? Yes, please, NCAA, please do. So, like, for example, in NCAA can give an example, but I want to give an example too. I had a pool yesterday with, I posted this on Twitter, some of you might have seen it, where it had Koma, Vorinclex, the 1-mana Spirit Snow card, Realm Walker, the green-blue rare saga, all green-blue rares, right? All green-blue rares. And I can see a world where I looked at my pool and I just shouldn't be building a blue-green deck. Now, I think that's very uncommon. This is a very extreme example. But if my green and blue were extremely shallow, like I'm talking like bad, right? I do not think that 20 bad cards makes up for 6 good cards. Or sorry, 17 bad cards makes up for 6 great cards. Now, this is where it's on a sliding scale, right? Of course, that's not going to be that common. You're going to want to play your rares a lot of the time. But I could see a world where my red-black deck, for example, had just very, very good uncommons and commons and had a very solid plan of a good aggressive plan, or let's say a red-white deck, that would be the better deck. If my green-blue is trash, right? And I just want to use that as an extreme example to say that will not happen very often, but you should be looking at your pool, not just how do I play my rares, but how do I build the best deck possible, right? So what you do is you sort to get a good idea, and the way I would sort my pool is I sort by color if you can, pull your rares in, and build around those rares if you can, right? If you can build around those rares, great, and you have a good deck, great. Just like this deck I showed you before, chat. That's a great example. I was very fortunate in my deck here, where all of my cards were just good in blue and green. I could just play them, right? But if they were just trash, I might not. That's the thing. Now, if my red and green were my red and black deck was okay, it wasn't anything special, I'd probably just play this because my top end cards are great. So when I'm sorting my sealed pool, build the first deck, right? Build the first deck where it's like, these support my most powerful cards, my good rares, my good uncommons, but then build the next best thing, right? Build if your red and white is very deep, start building those decks and see what they look like. It's very important not to get tunnel vision on your best cards. Another thing I would say is, and this is common if you're looking at your pool, don't mistake a shallow pool, not a shallow pool. Don't mistake a color that doesn't have a lot of good cards with a color that... Don't mistake a color that doesn't have a lot of cards with a color that doesn't have a lot of good cards. I think it's very easy to go I only have 8 white cards, right? No, Siri, I didn't want to talk to you. But actually, your 8 white cards are very good and a very good base for a black-white deck, for example, or a green-white deck, right? So don't write off that color just because you don't have many cards in it. Do you ever want to choose colors based on synergy with your primary color or synergy with your bombs rather than raw power, even if the synergistic colors are a bit shallow? That's going to be, yes, sometimes you will, Gumboots. That's the thing. That's kind of what I'm getting at here, where it's it depends. Sometimes you will, and the most important takeaway I can have for you from this is consider all of your options. And don't get tunnel visioned on, well, I've heard that you're supposed to play your bombs and your good cards, so I should just build this deck, right? don't get tunnel vision on that, because once again, the best thing to do is build the best deck in your pool, and that might not include rares. Build decks if you have multiple, or build multiple decks if you have the time. This is similar to what I said before, but be very, very willing to build 4 or 5 decks, right, and compare, because it's also very easy to build your first deck and go, this looks pretty good, and just submit it, right? You don't need to. You don't need to submit it at that point. You often, well, here's the thing. Depends how quickly you build your sealed pool, and this is why it's really good to do practice pools, so that you get used to kind of the common decks you might fall into, and you can build those first, right? Because if you only have, I don't know how long it's going to be on Arena, but if you only have 20 minutes, and you only build one deck in that 20 minutes, you're going to miss out on another deck you could have built. Especially if you're playing best of 3. This is going to matter because you're going to want to be sideboarding into a second deck sometimes, right? I can't tell you the number of times where I've done my build and I've gone, oh, okay, this looks good. And then I walk away for a few minutes, come back and go, wait, let me build this other deck. Oh, no, this is just better, right? So if you have the time, build multiple decks. And like I said, Arena is no timer. Perfect. If you have the time, build multiple decks, because you'll learn a lot. And if you can, build beforehand to get, build practice pools beforehand to get a good idea of what the decks look like. After you have your deck, after you have your deck you settle on, you're like, okay, this is a pretty good deck. I think this is what I'm going with. This is my choice. Make fine-tuning adjustments, A lot of times you'll just throw things in there. You're like, this is a good card. As you're building your deck, you'll go, this is a good card, this is a good card, this is a good card. And then after you build your deck, you kind of forget that you put it into this good card. But maybe that good card doesn't have a lot of support for it. So maybe Frostpire Arcanist, for example, the 2/5 regrows a spell. You put that in there because you're like, oh, I have multiple copies of this spell, but then you cut those spells, right, afterwards. It's very easy to have a card in there that was good at some point in the build, but doesn't end up being good at the end, right? I don't know if you can set multiple decks. That's a great question. If chat knows that, yeah, I'm not sure. And so here's something to consider too, right? You're going to be playing, especially in this Arena Open, you're going to be playing 9 games potentially if you're playing best of 1, and maybe you make 1 card mistake or 2 card mistakes, right? Over the course of 9 games, over the course of a day, especially if GPs become a thing and you're playing long days, those mistakes are going to compound, right? So just 1 card difference can make or break a game of Magic, and that might be the difference between you qualifying for day 2 and not, right? So once you've got that deck, really make sure you've got that build correct. And this can be in the mana base too, right? Really worry about your mana base. We didn't quite get to this yet, and I think we'll get to this probably when we actually do the build. But your mana base, I think in draft and sealed is something that's overlooked. You just let the Arena deck builder do it for you, and then you're like, okay, that's fine, and then you submit, right? Really ask yourself how many basics, non-basics, snow, whatever it is you want to put in your deck. Count your sources. That's very important. If you're splashing, this comes back to splashing. If you're splashing, and maybe I should have mentioned this during the how to responsibly splash portion, make sure that you have 8 sources of your main color, right? That is the baseline for responsible splashing. 8 sources. If you're blue-green splash red, you can't just put 3 mountains in your deck. You have to make sure somewhere in your deck you have 3 blue sources, 3 red sources, 3 green sources, and then the red comes somewhere else, right? So make those fine-tuning adjustments not just to your cards, but to your pool. Kaldheim specific. So be on one end of the aggro control spectrum. So a lot of times, this is true for basically every format. I mean, I don't even know if we want to talk about this. It's worth talking about because I feel like it's worth reiterating. But don't be a mid-range deck, right? Sorry, Sanctum. 883, not 833. You want to be not just a generic mid-range deck, because you're going to get run over by the good aggressive decks, and you're going to get trounced by the late game decks, right? So you just want to be biasing towards either a controlling deck, a good mid-range deck, like a, when I say good mid-range, I mean like a good top-end heavy, bomb-heavy, good card quality heavy snow deck, or a aggressive deck, right? Don't be in the middle. That's the worst, right? You don't want like a few 2s, a few okay 3s, some removal spells, but no actual way to close out the game. And this really goes back to what I said at the beginning, having those 3 quality things, ways to close the game, interaction, and card draw. I guess the one caveat that is worth talking about is that, I was just saying that for Galaxy. I was just saying that. One thing is, if you are a aggro deck, just like in draft, you don't need the card advantage as much. The card advantage is you killing them. But again, the aggro decks are not going to come together as often. But don't worry about, the rider on a good seal deck has these 3 things. If you have the good aggro deck, you don't need the card draw, right? What I found in this format is snow does come together. You can play snow. It's actually very, I wouldn't say very easy, but you get 3 snow lands in your land slot, and you get some number of Shimmer Drift Veils, hopefully. You might get Replicating Ring, you might get Glittering Frost, and again, Glittering Frost and Ring are 2 cards that I'm like iffy about in sealed, but if you have reasons to play snow, you can play snow, and Frost and Ring are going to be good cards, right? Oh, did I say 3? I meant 6, my bad. You get 6 basics or duels. So yeah, you can definitely have pools where it's a real thing. Are you going to have pools where Narfi is a playable card, or where Frost Augur is a playable card? Maybe sometimes, not often, I would say. But you're going to have decks where Bergstrider is for sure a playable card. That's just going to be a good card in your deck a lot of the time. Where the Icy Manipulator is going to be playable in your deck. You're going to have those 5-6 snow sources. You're going to have sometimes decks where Eyesight Troll is a good card, right? Where you just have 7-8 snow sources and you can pay snow. What don't I like about Ring and Frost and Sealed? So I was saying this before, so if you haven't caught it, go back in the VOD, but I'll repeat here just for the people that are coming in. It's, if you need snow, if you want snow sources, those are good cards. But if you just want them as fixing and ramp, they are like second-rate fixing and ramp, compared to the lands, right? Because like taking turn 3 off like is a cost versus both ends of the spectrum, not just the aggressive decks, but against the like controlling decks too, because they're going to be able to maybe just play like a 5/5 at some point, right? And taking turn 3 off is a cost, as much as it might not seem like one, but also it's like not a real card, right? It's just a land. Yeah. So I'm not like not going to play those cards. I played them in my very good sealed deck. But I played them in my very good sealed deck because I wanted a snow source, and I wanted additional mana sources, and I needed a splash. So you have to have all those 3 things going right? Yeah, I agree, double exposure. I like Ring a bit more too. Unless you have the 2/2, right? I'd say Narfi is playable, but if you happen to have a lot of zombies and 3 snow sources somewhere. Yeah, but like 3 zombies is kind of not not a common thing, right? How do you draw the line between mid-range and control, since the control would want to put things on board early so that it doesn't get run over? Oh, that's a good question, Fumblebuck. So, yeah, so if you weren't here for my the earlier part of this where I was talking about the good 2-drops, like even your control decks, the control decks in this format like this, I'd classify this as a control deck. They're really just mid-range decks. You don't get like counterspell heavy control decks very often, right? So they're like mid-range leaning controlling decks, or maybe controlling leaning mid-range decks, right? That's what I mean by control decks in this format. Like decks, cards like this, right? Or decks like that, decks like this, right? Where you have good late game. I'm classifying control decks as like, you will win the late game because you have enough ways to win the late game with this Coma, with this Vorniflex, whatever it is, right? When I say don't be mid-range, I'm talking don't be like a green-red beatdown deck. A green-red beatdown deck is what I mean by don't be mid-range. You don't want to really be that. You want to be one end of the spectrum or not, right? I guess that is an important distinction to make, right? In your controlling decks, which are just mid-range snow decks, you do still want... So I'm skipping around a lot. You do still want these cards. These good 2-drops, right? Control doesn't mean don't play early things. Control just means, like, Control just means you're going to have a great late game. You still need to play the early things. You just don't want your early things to be bad cards, right? Yes, you can definitely build an aggro deck in the sealed format. 100%. 100%. They come together. This is an example over here. That's an example. This is a sealed deck, right? Then again, maybe if you haven't caught the beginning of this, I go in depth about don't think this is sealed. I shouldn't play aggro, right? Don't play a bad aggro deck is the subtext there, right? Don't play a bad aggro deck. If you have not a lot of 2s, not a lot of 1s or 3s or whatever, I'd say 2s and 1s. That's going to be a bad deck. That's like a mid-range deck at that point, right? You don't want to play that. But this is a good deck, and you can play this in your sealed pool if that's your best deck. Anyways, let's go into some final points here. So does come together. Cards that go up and down in value. So, yeah, that's a good way to say it. It's about inevitability. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We're gonna exit the PowerPoint presentation here. I will save my work. Thank you very much. And I'm just gonna go through the set basically and talk about some cards. If anybody has any questions about specific cards, please say as we go through them, and we'll talk about them. So I'm not going to talk too much about the busted rares or whatever, busted mythics, but with this card, right, Gary? Yeah, if there's any rare here that you have questions about, I suppose maybe we can talk about them. But most of them are just like these are powerful enough cards, right, that you're just going to play them. Oh yeah, we'll wait. Wait. It's better now? Better. Okay. Sorry, what I was saying is that I'm not going to talk too much about these rares because they're just good cards and you're just going to play them anytime you get them in your sealed deck. But if anybody has a specific question about any of them, I'm happy to answer, How many cards is Jorn on them? Is too many. What's the maximum theoretical Jorn? Wait, what? Oh, I got crackly audio. Thank you for the sub, Brian. Really appreciate that. Crackling Drake. Yeah, Kaldheim is just good. He's just good. Egon is fine. Like, it's not a trap. You should put this card in your sealed deck most of the time. Right? No, Kaldheim is great. Kaldheim is great. You should put this card in your sealed deck most of the time. It's not a fantastic card by any means. It's just good. It's just fine. It's like a C+ level card. Side A is going to be relevant sometimes. Side B is going to be relevant sometimes. Right? So something like Gravenlore does go up, obviously, because it's card advantage-y. What else? There's that's the thing. It depends, right? Deck list, right? If you have that, and this is my thesis, or my thesis statement for this whole presentation. Build the best deck in your pool. If Kolvori, these names. If this is a good card in your sealed pool, as in you have 3 legends or 2 other legends in your deck to find, she's going to be a fine card, and you can play her, right? Let's keep going here. Dream Devourer is not good. You can put the card in your deck, but I would be looking to put something else in my deck. Real K asks, would I cut Dream Ascendant Spear? So I cut it from my deck yesterday, actually. I don't know if it was right or not, but there was a lot of things fighting for a spot in my deck, and I didn't have like a ton of snow, and you want a ton of snow, right? I think it was still correct not to, but I can be convinced not to think that. Alright, we're back. Alright, Frost's Augur is one that obviously you're not going to be playing that much. Icebind Pillar is a card that you're going to be playing, again, if your pool can support it. Right? Don't just look at this card and be like, I can't support this card. No, it's something to do with my setup. How good is Ovar and Sealed? I'm going to answer the same way. If you have a card, cards that are good with it, it's going to be good. But it's not, like, context, right? Like, if you have things that incidentally target, it's going to be good. But, yeah, with fight spells, exactly. There was a card I wanted to talk about here. Where was it? Oh, yeah, like, I think this card does... I think this card is worth talking about, because I still think this card is overrated. I think it is, like, playable if you have a lot of snow, but in CL it's just not... It's not likely you have enough snow to make this a good card. It's going to be fine. But I cut it from my deck yesterday because I had a lot of good cards, basically. Let's keep going. I'm gonna want to point out like things that are specifically worse or better. Oh, Ruthless You. Look for that because that gets your better cards basically. Let's see what else. It's hard going through these like things that get better, things that are worse because it's just gonna be very contextual on your pool, right? Valkyrie Sword gets a little bit better. All of these get a little. Actually, all of these. This one's easy. These ones all get better. Because they're good early, except Sword, and they provide you late game value to grind. So these are pulls. These are pulls a lot of the time into your colors. This card gets a little bit better, just because the games go longer, and this card is good in a late game. Counterspells go up a bit. I think it's a little bit overblown how good counterspells are, just because all the cards are good, and it's still a cost to like leave up 3 mana in this format in some of your decks. Anything else here? Chat, let me know if there's anything you want to talk about. I'll point things out, like I said, but there's not too much, I think, changes in value. Cards like this and this do get a little bit better. Just anything that like gives you incidental 2-for-1 value. Like these cards are going to be good when they're good. Fearless Pup, Battlefield Raptor, but in general, I guess on average they're worse. But I would not main Invoke the Divine. You could. Sorry, let me rephrase that. You could main it. I don't think you should actively main it. I think it'll be fine. Just fine. Yes, Disdainful Stroke. Yes, that is very true. Disdainful Stroke does go up in value. I think Disdainful Stroke is close to being good in draft, like just a good card. I think the nudge over by a turn and a half or whatever the changes in Sealed, I think Disdainful Stroke does get better. A Broken Wing, like you can play Broken Wings. I'm not like actively looking to if I just have good cards in my pool, right? If I just have other removal spells. If I just have other removal spells, it's not a huge deal. Skull Raid goes up a little bit. Let's see what else. Firewalker. Planning sort of as it goes from like kind of unplayable to like a little more playable if you have specific great cards to find and you don't have a lot to do in the early game, but even still it's like kind of sketch. Master Skull a little bit better. Yeah, Master Skull again, contextual based on your pool. Skull Raid gets a little bit better, I was saying. I don't think these cards get meaningfully more better. Like Dread Rider, a slight amount. Oh, actually, Frost Peak Yeti. Frost Peak Yeti is a good one. With this one, if you do have the 4, 5, 6 no sources, this one does get a little bit better. What about Snakeskin Veil and other protection spells? I don't think so. Still, like again, you can play it, but it's not a card I'm like actively looking to play. Like, yeah, people are gonna have more removal, but it's a high opportunity cost card. It just doesn't do a lot. Like you often want to be proactive, and that's not a proactive card. Hawk goes up a little bit. I actively want to main deck a copy of Runashore, sometimes two. That's true for draft too, but yeah, that's a good point, Real Kate. If you have like 3 really good, 2 or 3 really good ways to win the game, but not a lot of other good ways, Snakeskin Veil goes up in value. Right, and that's the thing, Aaron, I would say, is that, like, it is hard to attain board parity consistently, right? One of the things that I was pointing out earlier, but it's good to reiterate for people that maybe weren't here, is that board stalls just don't happen all that often in modern day limited. They happen, but they're not like a function of the format or a feature of the format, you know?